Yes, indeedy, folks. It's the Beer Drinker's Guide to the Great Wahoo. It's time to drive Steens Mountain. Good old Oregon. It's known for the Willamette Valley and the coast. But out here on the eastern side of Oregon, there's a big hole that I always thought was just filled with desert. Lordy, was I ever wrong about that. There's some great country just waiting for a little 1 or 2 or 3 day drive right in our back door. A good excuse to go adventuring in this country is driving to the top of Steens Mountain. The Steens Mountains are the ones that you see off to the west as you drive from Winnemucca to Jordan Valley. Getting to the top of Steens Mountain itself can be rather difficult because of snow. For that reason, I decided to go in July of the year 2008. Just last time that we went driving Steens, we went and explored the very tippy top of Steens Mountain. While the drive up Steens Mountain was quite a lovely and reasonable dirt road, the drive down has a little section where they give you very stern warnings. And that, folks, is what we're going to go drive today. On the 2-mile drive from this junction up to the top of the hill, I had noticed beautiful Big Indian Canyon. After coming back from the very tippy top of the hill, I stopped and looked out over Big Indian Canyon, and I did notice off in the distance, off in the far distance, a very interesting feature. We're going to be using the zoom lens to look way out at this far ridge. Of course, with zoom lenses being held by hand, it is possible to lose a few features, but I think you'll be able to see in this shot, right along the top of that far ridge, there is a road. And that road, my friends, is the road we will be driving when we go down from Steens Mountain. Well, I was looking forward to getting to the top of Steens Mountain, and I enjoyed it immensely. I must admit, I was just as much looking forward to the drive down this northern slope of Big Indian Canyon. The road is very, very seriously marked as a rough road, and we can't wait to see just how well we do getting down that 4-mile stretch that not only is the sign warning us about, but every car we pass has had something to say about it. Just so that you have fair warning, please note that where we were looking at the far ridge with the little road scratched out along the top of it is part of the 4-mile stretch that they call the Rooster area. And they warn you not to go over it if you're pulling trailers or if you have a low clearance vehicle. However, that little road that we saw scratched along the top of the mountain is not the rough part of the Rooster area. No. The rough part is around back where we cannot see yet. We will begin our little adventure of driving down the Rooster on this exciting episode of Driving Steens. The advisory sign pointed out that there are 6 miles of road out to the Rooster So with the beginning being a good place to start, let's go check out these 6 miles of road. What we are doing is following a fairly narrow ridge between Big Indian Canyon on the south and Little Blitzen Gorge to the north. Off in the distance, I noticed a little obstruction in the road. As I came up to it, I decided to just be patient, hold back, let the dust blow off the road before it got to me. And he was a very thoughtful driver. It wasn't long before he pulled over, I passed, and then I was able to enjoy what it takes to drive down a very narrow road with a big pile of dirt in the middle of it. And 6 miles later, the road runs to the south of the hill that we've been approaching, and we have finished the initial running out to the area that they call the Rooster Comb. What we see here is the spot where the road leaves the ridge that we have been driving out between Big Indian Canyon and Little Blitzen Gorge. And we enter onto this area where we had been looking into the far, far distance at a little road scratched along the far end of Big Indian Canyon. And we will go hang on to that bit of hillside next time that we drive Steens. And now, let's pay our respects to Herod the Great, a man that National Geographic has called Architect of the Holy Land. In our last look at King Herod, we saw that indeed he was a mighty king. He reigned a long time. However, he was also falsely accused. His reign covered some 32 years. And, yes, he was the reigning king of Judea when Christ was born. However, the account in Matthew of his having slaughtered the innocents because he was afraid of another king taking over his throne was not supported by historical fact. While King Herod was rather a tyrant in many ways, as were and continue to be most rulers, he was apparently innocent of having slaughtered all of the male children of Bethlehem at the time of the birth of Christ. Today's episode of King Herod the Great we can call Builder, Tyrant, and Buried.
What Herod did, and what he was famous for, was building monumental structures. One of those monumental structures was the magnificent Second Temple. The Roman Empire was a vast land covering many people of different faiths. The Romans fully understood that it wasn't worth fighting over faith. They were more than willing to build structures to the different faiths of their empire. This magnificent structure, of course, needed a solid, flat foundation. A great wall was built around the construction site. It was filled in, and upon that flat fill, the temple was built. When Jewish zealots revolted in 70 current era, the Romans came in and decided that one way to put down the rebellion was to destroy this temple. The only thing they left was a small section of the western wall that used to support the grounds. This small section of the western wall is now called the Wailing Wall, where people go to wail, to mourn the loss of this great temple. Throughout the land, Herod also built bathhouses, arenas, and 11 great fortresses. One of these was Masada. Just being able to see the ruins today leaves us with inspiration for what the human spirit can do when it sets out to accomplish something.
In show number 52 of the Beer Drinker's Guide to the Great Wahoo, we saw that when archaeologists were going through Masada, they found a sealed jar, and in that jar were some seeds of a palm tree. Tests showed these seeds to be 2,000 years old. The seeds were kept around for a while until just a few years ago, someone had the courage to try to germinate them. One of those seeds is now this beautiful palm. This is the oldest seed that humans have ever germinated. In commemoration, the plant is called Methuselah, a visitor from a bygone era. So here's to Herod, Herod the Great. Quite a guy. And while I do want to give him credit for not having murdered all those children, and while I do want to give him credit for having built so many sites that today we go as pilgrims to see, coming from an era that changed our world, I do not want to get all gushy and say that the guy was just a swell backdoor neighbor that you would have been glad to have around and never had to worry about. The fact is, he was a ruler in a rough and tumble time. And, no doubt, one of the reasons that he reigned as long as he did, for 34 years, was because he was ruthless. There are many accounts in the historic record that are corroborated by other accounts that attest to his ability to crush opposition. Among others, one of the most gruesome was, because of palace intrigues, at different times he had 3 of his own sons murdered, as well as his most beloved wife. It turns out that the August 2009 edition of Smithsonian Magazine told the story of finding the tomb of King Herod the Great. People have been looking for the tomb of King Herod for centuries. There is a lot of evidence that we finally found it. There are some great photographs of the sarcophagus that we believe Herod was buried in. Unfortunately, none of these photos are in public domain. So, may I recommend you Google Herod sarcophagus and they will come right up. You can also check out the August 2009 issue of Smithsonian Magazine for an excellent article on the tomb of King Herod. For many centuries, we have known that the historic record said that King Herod had sworn that he would be buried at a place we now call Herodium. This is a very unlikely spot to build a huge fortress. There was no particular advantage as far as military purposes go, and yet Herod built a huge fortress at this spot on the edge of the desert within sight of both Jerusalem and Bethlehem. Herod chose this unlikely site because at the age of 33, in 40 before the current era, he was the governor of Galilee. At that time, the Parthian Empire overthrew Judea. Faced with a choice between swearing allegiance to the Parthians or maintaining his allegiance to the Romans, who he had been serving under, Herod decided to stick with the Romans. And with 5,000 people, he fled Jerusalem. The 5,000 people consisted of his family and experienced fighting men. As the party reached this area, a rocky hillside close to Jerusalem, the rough terrain and their hurrying wagons made for a disaster when the wagon that Herod's mother was riding in overturned. Herod drew his sword and was ready to kill himself when he saw that his mother had survived the accident. Instead of killing himself, Herod turned to the battle and was victorious. To quote Josephus, the historian we have looked at before, Herod fought, quote, "not like one that was in distress, but like one that was excellently prepared for war." In tribute to winning the battle and to his mother's having survived the accident, Herod swore that this is the spot where he would be buried. He went to Rome. He became the leader of the land. He returned to conquer Judea for the Romans, and 10 years later began to build this huge edifice. Eventually, the sides of the mountain were covered with gravel and were smoothed off to make a perfect mound that even today, without the fortress rising some 40 feet above the hill, continues to dominate the countryside. It is believed that Herod's tomb has been discovered about halfway up this hill. And finally, let me leave you with this, what I consider rather amusing story. This story that we paupers can tell about the powerful and their pretensions. As Herod approached death, he had all of Judea's local ministers and rulers and kings rounded up and imprisoned, we believe here, at Herodium. His intention was that on his death they would all be slaughtered, and that would guarantee that when he died, there would indeed be a great wailing and moaning at his death, perhaps the greatest wailing and moaning of anyone's death in history. Well, we know about the best laid plans of mice and men. The fact is, when Herod, who was not that well liked at this point. He'd grown quite cranky. When Herod died, the people that were supposed to be slaughtering all these kings and royalty simply let them go. And throughout the land, there was the sound of great rejoicing. Now available from your beer drinking guide to the Great Wahoo, you can get DVD movies made up from different stories that have been shown here on the Great Wahoo. So far, there are 4 different DVDs with 7 different movies. You can check out the world's 2 greatest river floods, both of which happened right here in Idaho. If that seems like a tall order to fulfill, there is a short 11-minute movie that looks into the claims that these are the biggest floods that have ever happened in the geologic history of the Earth. Another DVD looks at driving around the Albions and through the City of Rocks, as well as having a movie on the Boise Kelton stage. This stage was pulled by galloping horses night and day for 40 hours. It was quick, but can you imagine being behind galloping horses with all of the dust and being thrown around on a rough ride for 40 hours? Egad! Of Pooh You and the Great Wahoo is a 1.5-hour movie that gives an extensive look at how we turn sewage into river water. In 24 hours, what you flushed becomes swimmable and fishable. And there is a DVD with 2 40-minute movies about Boise High, about building the old campus and heating it, and the renovation that they did in the 1990s. Your beer drinking guide also has 2 books out. One, 104 pages on building, heating, and remodeling Boise High, as well as a 13-page booklet on Boise geothermal development. These books are rich in historic and contemporary photographs. Also available on DVD are copies of your own favorite shows, or if there was some story that was serialized on several different Great Wahoos, I can take those different segments of the story and put them on a DVD for you. For more information on these movies, these books, or these services, check out my website, www.greatwahoo.com, and feel free to send me an email at beerdrinker@greatwahoo.com. And now, a true story of love, commitment, and promises. Yes, it is the true story of a man wanting her for his wife. Brad was quite the swarthy dude, and, if he did say so himself, he did have his luck with the ladies. Even so, he was quite smitten when he walked into Louie's lounge, and he noticed a new fair damsel sitting at one of the booths. She seemed to be looking at him as well, so he invited her up to the bar for a drink, and they enjoyed a long and chatty conversation. It turns out her name was Julianne, and they had such a lovely conversation that Brad felt quite confident when, late in the evening, he suggested they go up to his place. "Well, I am enjoying the conversation," said Julianne, "and sure, I'd like to come up. But I really have to be quite upfront and tell you that it's not going to go anywhere." Well, Brad was quite used to that. He laughed it off, and they went strolling to his place, which, it turned out, was one of the swankiest apartment buildings in town. When they got on the elevator, she noticed that he used a key to unlock the penthouse button. And, sure enough, when they arrived at his pad, it was a lovely place to be. Brad fixed them up a couple martinis. They sat and enjoyed the view and continued to enjoy their chatty conversation. Once again, they truly were hitting it off, and Julianne was truly enjoying herself. However, out of the blue, she once again reminded him, "Well, Brad, you know, I'm sure having a good time, but I have to assure you, this is not going anywhere." Undaunted, Brad said, "Oh, but I'm having such a good time. Why don't you let me open this excellent bottle of wine, and we'll enjoy that?" Julianne said, "Fine, let's enjoy it." So the evening passed as they enjoyed this lovely, lovely bottle of Bordeaux. After much laughing and giggling, once again Julianne, rather out of the blue, said, "Well, you know, Brad, this really is delightful, and you really are a great host. And certainly you're a handsome man. But I have to let you know, it's not going to go anywhere." Brad was a man of the world and knew not to push. Fine. He was enjoying himself. He was having a lovely time. So he suggested, let's break out a bottle of bubbly and enjoy that. Which they did. As always, the bubbly served to make the conversation even chattier, even funner, with more and more laughter and more carrying on. Even so, at some point, Julianne stopped the conversation and said, "Ah, Brad, you know, you're really a wonderful host, and I hate to be a stick in the mud, but I really must tell you, this is not going to go anywhere." Brad said, "Well, Julianne, what kind of guy do you think I am? Really, I'm not looking for just a casual encounter. The fact is, I wanted you for my wife." "Oh, well," said Julianne, "in that case, that changes everything. In that case, things might just go somewhere. So, when is your wife going to be home?" And that's this week's Beer Drinker's Guide to the Great Wahoo. Thanks for watching. Hope to see you next week. And in the meantime, keep celebrating the Great Wahoo.